All right, our next lecture is on EPOC, excess post-oxygen consumption, and then on the flip side of that, an oxygen deficit. So what we mean by oxygen consumption is essentially our pulmonary oxygen uptake. What we mean by steady state, so this is sort of a new term that we maybe haven't talked about since the VO2 max lecture, and even then we didn't really get too much into it. But what we're talking about here is the balance of energy requirement between working muscles and ATP production, specifically in aerobic metabolism. In aerobic metabolism. So oxygen deficit or O2 debt. For some individuals, they can maintain steady state for a long time. So think elite marathon runners. So steady state is that really just amazing part, and maybe you have felt this as a runner or in your sport of choice. It doesn't happen all the time, but you're running at a pretty decent pace and you kind of think, this is easy. I'm not breathing heavy, but I'm moving pretty quickly. You're really in that nice sort of harmonious spot where you have steady state. So you have a great balance of energy between your working muscles and ATP production. Things are just kind of moving and grooving. So for some individuals, they can maintain steady state for a long time. And the reason this is because they have a high capacity of central circulation to deliver oxygen to working muscles. And they have a high capacity of these muscles to effectively use the oxygen. So they have a really nice balance between oxygen delivery and oxygen use. So that's what we mean by steady state. And I'll show you this in a graph soon. Now, oxygen deficit is sort of the opposite of steady state. So initially, oxygen consumption does not increase instantaneously to steady state. The reason why is because we have a lag in oxygen consumption early in exercise, because the energy for muscles, or the energy for muscle action, comes directly from the immediate breakdown of ATP. So have you ever started out on a run and you're starting out pretty easy and you think, okay, I have a 10-mile run. And within those first 10 seconds, you're like, why am I breathing heavy? I'm not going that fast. I'm already out of breath. How in the world am I going to continue running for the amount that I have on my training plan today? That is because the muscle action comes directly from that immediate breakdown of ATP, that first anaerobic system. So that's why we have warm-up periods, right? Where we're trying to get our muscles and our bodies in tune for that actual work. So even with increased oxygen availability and decreased oxygen diffusion gradients at the tissue level, the initial increase in exercise oxygen consumption is always lower than our steady state oxygen consumption. So we can think of oxygen deficit, and again, kind of going into our EPOC as well. This will make sense when I show you a graph here in a second. You have your initial warm-up, You have your exercise time period, whatever mode that is, for however long, however intensely you're doing something. And then you have a cool down post sort of exercise time. I'm going to explain this. So let's hold on here. Okay, we're going to draw an awesome graph. Get ready. Get ready. Okay, on our x-axis, we have time. On our y-axis, we have O2 consumption. We're going to keep this simple. So we have this initial warm-up. So right here, we have a warm-up. Then we sort of begin our exercise and we get into this nice part right here of our steady state. So this is the steady state exercise portion. We also have to draw in our oxygen deficit. So this is our O2 debt. This is the energy for our muscles coming directly from the immediate breakdown of ATP. That's happening right here in our oxygen deficit. What we're trying to do in our warm-up is get to this point where we have this needed O2 requirement to get to steady state. Now remember, steady state is aerobic ATP supply meeting our ATP demand. So after we've warmed up, after we've performed our exercise, whatever that is, we stop exercise. Ooh. So right here, we have stopped exercise. But the cool thing that we're going to talk about right now is right under this curve. So this is what we are going to call EPOC, excess post oxygen consumption. So this is essentially the repayment of our oxygen deficit. I don't know if any of you remember infomercials. There used to be commercials you'd wake up to in the middle of the night, and it would be like the Bowflex or the elliptical or the Nordic track, and you would hear this individual saying, you'll burn calories the rest of your day. If you do this piece of exercise equipment for 7 minutes, you'll burn all of these calories throughout your day. And they're very much exaggerating in infomercials, but the concept is sort of there. So this excess post oxygen consumption is basically this amount of oxygen required to restore your body to normal resting physiological function. So it's also repairing muscles and tendons and bones. So it's repaying and repairing debts as well. So think about a time where you've had a really hard workout and you've stopped working out, and maybe you're on your way, you're driving to now go get dinner. You might not feel it, but what's going on physiologically and molecularly inside your body is sort of this heightened awareness of, oh man, we just did a lot of work. We got to repair the muscles. We got to get the tendons strong again. We have to get our heart rate back down. Your heart rate has probably already come back down, but your body is really sort of not fighting or struggling, but it really is trying to get back to that physiological homeostasis. And that is EPOC, excess post-oxygen consumption, the amount of oxygen required to restore your body to these normal physiological functions. So that's our oxygen deficit and our EPOC graph. So oxygen consumption during recovery from exercise, this is what I was saying here in the part that's written in pink. Following exercise, body processes do not immediately return to resting levels. So after light, short duration physical effort, it doesn't take much or long to return to resting levels. So in contrast, if you have more strenuous running, this is going to depend on how rapidly this takes place depends on training status, nutrition, age. Some of these concepts that we've talked about before will definitely impact your oxygen consumption during recovery from exercise. So, what happens during recovery from exercise to utilize oxygen? What I want to do is I want to show these two graphs. I'm sorry that they're a little bit blurry, but what we have here is light exercise on the left-hand side. You can see that you're not at steady state for very long, and your EPOC, this repaying of debts, isn't that much compared to you were at steady state. You were able to easily reach steady state for a longer period of time during light exercise. Your oxygen deficit is not as big as it would be during heavy exercise, where you're really struggling to get to steady state. You can't hold steady state that long because of this heavy exercise. And then you also have a lot of oxygen debt and excess post-oxygen consumption that you're trying to repay your body. So I sort of just told you the differences in these two graphs is that steady state in light exercise, you can hold for a while. Whereas steady state in our heavy exercise, you can't hold for as long. Also, our oxygen deficit in light exercise is less than our oxygen deficit in heavy exercise, as well as our EPOC being less in light exercise and more so in heavy exercise. So trained versus untrained individuals, again, just some common themes in talking about the better trained you are, the less oxygen debt you'll have and the less EPOC you'll have, which is why we kind of go back to that overload principle. When your body gets used to something, you can overload the system again, and then the next stage becomes easier, and the next, and the next. So here is this oxygen deficit graph. This is the same that we drew here, but in case this didn't quite make sense or seem a little messy, I wanted to give you the book version showing oxygen deficit, trying to meet requirement, leading to steady state, and then our excess post-oxygen consumption here in the blue and the green. So following exercise, we know our body processes do not immediately return to resting levels. So after light short duration, recovery proceeds rapidly. But in contrast, more strenuous running requires more considerable time for your resting metabolism to return to these pre-activity levels. This is just showing us the same thing again. So hopefully you understand the idea of oxygen deficit and EPOC after watching this lecture. See you on the next one.